Hello. Today I will be commentating on a rather interesting ship, the USS Arizona, an upcoming T6 American Premium. First of all, I actually like the looks of the ship. As you can see, I like the different color schemes and the way the premium camo looks on it. What I don't like, however, is those two high towers you see in the middle of the ship. They are so incredibly tall that it makes it very easy to pinpoint where to shoot if you're shooting at the ship behind hills. Having two high towers like this makes it easy to pinpoint which way the ship is going or which way it's heading behind the cliff. So honestly, I'm not a fan of that, even though I like the looks of the ship. Those towers are definitively basically a tactical weakness. I understand the reason why they had them, to obviously understand the reasoning behind them, but that doesn't mean that in the game itself they are that useful. They are in fact a rather big negative. Other than that, I like the looks of the ship. The ship itself is honestly very much like the New Mexico. Now, being very much like the New Mexico is not a bad thing at all. New Mexico is basically what I consider one of the best T6 battleships by far. Like, if I had to rank the T6 battleships, I would go Fuso, New Mexico, Warspite. And Fuso and New Mexico are very tightly, very close. They play slightly differently. One is better at long range, one is a crazy brawler, but they are both pretty even. So being compared to them is not a bad thing. And T6 battleships are insanely strong. Now, this one does lose out to the New Mexico quite a bit. First of all, one of the first things you'll notice if you have played the New Mexico lately and you switch to this one is that the guns are gonna feel a bit strange. That's because the shell velocity is worse. Especially the AP shell velocity, which is what you'll end up using the most. The AP shell velocity drops from, I think it was something like 832, I think it was 832 meters per second on the New Mexico. It drops to 792 on the Arizona. That makes the shells basically, I think that's almost the same speed as Des Moines. That's probably fairly close to Des Moines speeds. But the shell speed is not good. Losing shell speed is never a good thing because that means it's harder to land those pinpoint volleys. The second thing you'll notice is penetration seems very strange. And by that I mean citadels that I'm used to getting, I'm not getting anymore. I've been shooting broadsiding cruisers and I've seen my shell bounce multiple times. So it's fairly obvious that this ship lacks significantly in the penetration value compared to the holy shit, is this guy gonna team kill me? Those are some fucking ballsy torps. Yeah, it's fairly obvious that this ship lacks significantly in penetration compared to the actual New Mexico. And that's of course not the only drawback it has compared to the New Mexico. It loses very slightly in small things like torpedo belt, that's like 1%, and it loses slightly in concealment, that's very small as well. Very slightly in rudder shift, once again, not a big deal because rudder shift is very good on the New Mexico and the turning circle is very good on both this ship and the New Mexico. So those are big issues, but it's important to mention that it loses slightly in pretty much everything. And the one thing that it loses a lot in is the anti-air. A fully upgraded New Mexico with a good captain is a goddamn anti-air beast. You shoot down planes like mad. On the other hand, the Arizona has very pitiful anti-air. You might notice that this guy is pretty much standing still and I'm aiming right at his citadel. And first of all, I'm not getting a single citadel. Second of all, the dispersion isn't really favoring me very well. I'm hitting like 3-4 shots at a time when I'm shooting 6, so I'm hitting half at the battleship standing still at like 9 kilometers. Supposedly, I've seen another review and I've heard about people saying that the so-called accuracy is slightly better on this ship than on the New Mexico, but I've had a hard time actually noticing said difference because the one thing you need accuracy the most at is against cruisers to hit that citadel. And because of the lack of pen, I feel like I'm missing out on a lot of citadels I would usually get. Against DDs, I mean, it might help, but it's hard to tell. Because against DDs, when you shoot DDs with a battleship, it's always going to be very much RNG involved. So it's supposed to have very slightly better accuracy than New Mexico, but I have a hard time seeing said difference. Now, well, did I forget anything about all? Basically, it feels like a slightly downgraded New Mexico in every way except for the guns. Okay, there I had a nice volley, but then again, it was against the Fuso, and if I couldn't Citadel a Fuso giving me full broadside, then I'd be definitely worried for the ship. Now, I've mentioned a lot of negatives, basically a lot of downsides, that yes, it's not as good as the New Mexico. Does it mean that it's a bad ship? Well, no. It's still a battleship that has 12 guns, and it has slightly higher HP than the New Mexico. It has good maneuverability. It's fairly good concealment, 14 kilometers without using a captain. I guess if you go for 15-point concealment captain, I guess you could make a really sneaky, nasty Arizona. That could work very well. Who's to say? So, is it a bad ship? No, it's definitely not a bad ship. But unlike, for example, the USS Texas, which I could say straight up is a New York but better, this one is pretty much a New Mexico but worse. And it does show that it's worse. There's also, of course, the reload that takes some getting used to. It's slightly worse again than, I think New Mexico has 34.2 seconds, I think. This one has 35 seconds. So once again, very slightly worse, not a big difference, but once again, it loses in the comparison. So, if this ship has a fairly rich history, of course, which is as usual when they release premium ships, especially American and British ones and so forth, they tend to go for the rich history ones. You can see there, by the way, full broadside Aoba, 6 hits, no Citadel. That's very rare because Aobas are a very easy ship to Citadel. But I see that stuff happen quite often. It could be overpins, it could be underpins. I don't really understand what's going on, but I know that I do not land Citadels as consistently as I do with the New Mexico. But once again, it's still a battleship, and a battleship with 12 guns at T6 is gonna wreck a lot of face. So if you do end up buying this, I doubt you will ever regret it, because if you enjoyed playing if you enjoyed playing battleships at this tier, especially American ones where you're gonna be slow but you're gonna have a significant amount of firepower and all this, then Arizona is probably fairly right up your alley. But you're not gonna feel as powerful as you do in the New Mexico, where fully upgraded you can shrug off CV attacks with fair ease, and you're able to pretty much take on anyone. That same thing doesn't really happen here because the lack of penetration becomes pretty obvious, especially if you happen to face other battleships, especially higher tier ones. By default, battleships always struggle against higher tier battleships, but that becomes incredibly obvious in Arizona, where the lack of penetration shows when you have to fight other high tier battleships. Like even Colorados and angled Nagatos can be a pain. But still, as you have been seeing here, I ended up in a, I think, T4 to T6 matchmaking here, so fairly favorable matchmaking. But in this kind of matchmaking you can just wreck. In higher matchmaking it automatically gets harder, especially for some reason some cruisers tend to give you a lot more difficulty than they did in New Mexico. For example, the York, I have, well, if someone really wants it I can upload it, but I have a clip of me shooting a York giving full broadside at like 13-14 kilometers. He's reversing and standing still, and I shoot 3 full volleys right at his broadside, and I only get bounces. I don't get a single Citadel. So obviously the York is a German cruiser, so he has a slightly protected Citadel, but still the difference is fairly obvious there. Now, this part actually I think shows fairly well just how strong the maneuverability on the ship is. Now, I'm not using the rudder shift mod, as people who know what builds I use know that I tend to go for the 15% reduction in fire and flooding damage instead of the rudder shift. And this Arizona, because it has the same turning circle as the New Mexico, is one of the ships I feel gets away with this quite easily, because if you didn't know, the Arizona, like the New Mexico, has a fantastic turning circle of 550 meters, which is very small. Of course, it's partly due to its slow speed, but it basically turns on a dime, and when you combine that with vigilance, you become extremely adept at dodging torpedoes. Now this Grammy, okay, I was hoping this Grammy would rush the smoke since the Izukaze has used his torp, so the Grammy could rush him and kill him, but this Izukaze doesn't seem to be paying much attention to that. He's just spamming the New York instead. Yeah, as here, he's torping me. I slow down, I turn. Thanks to the, once again, surprisingly good maneuverability for a battleship, I'm able to basically torpedo beat through these torps. And this is naturally one of the reasons why I consider the New Mexico one of the most fun ships to play. Because it's an incredible brawler because of its maneuverability, its gunpowder and all this. And the Arizona pretty much follows suit. It's not quite as strong. I feel like I'm basically a broken record at this point. It's not quite as strong, but it's still very strong. That was a bit unfortunate. You could see my dispersion there, and you could see the penetration. Like, I tend to expect more damage than I'm getting. That's a repeating feeling, especially since I've been playing the Colorado lately and I've been playing the Warspite lately. I'll be posting a commentary on that ship very soon. Especially since I've been playing the Warspite, you do notice a very, very significant difference in the gunpowder that you have in this ship. It is a loss in gunpowder compared to other, and the very small lack of accuracy simply isn't enough to compensate for the lack of gunpowder. But that's not to say it's not a fun ship. Like, it is a fun ship. If you like these type of battleships... Okay, where the hell is this Grammy? Like, this Grammy is obviously not paying attention at all to where these torpedoes are coming from. Like, this Izukaze is... like, he should be watching where I am, because this Izukaze is obviously gonna go for me. But this Grammy is, like, completely lost. Oh god. I told him Izukaze is south, but he's not turning south, he's sailing. I think he thinks the Izukaze is like in our base somewhere now. Oh lord. And that's a ship, that's a ship I really wish I'd have, the Gremiashu. But for those hoping we would finally get a really OP US premium, that's something along the lines of the something along the lines of what's it called, Atago or Gremiashi or Imperator Nikolai, or you know, one of these, or Murmansk even, which is by far the strongest Tier 5 cruiser. Like, any of you hoping we would get one of those, that's not gonna happen. But at least we didn't get an Atlanta. I mean, sure, it's not a New Mexico or a buffed New Mexico, but it isn't an Atlanta, so thank fuck for that. Because, and it isn't a Campbell town, like Jesus Christ, poor British Navy fans waiting for so long for another premium, except besides the Warspite, and then what they get is a goddamn Campbell town, which is probably the worst low tier DD in the entire game. Anyway, the game ended up, well, 400k credits with 139k damage. Not that important. Overall, a pretty decent game. And well, let's jump back to port. Just I've been playing this ship for a bit, just to show you. Like, let's look at my last played games. I've just got this ship today, and I played what, 7 games, and I won 6 of the games. So certainly not a weak ship. But if you're expecting a buff New Mexico, that's not what you'll be getting. As usual, I will start with the modules. There's really, well, since it's a premium, there's really nothing to upgrade here. Consumable wise, I at least recommend getting the premium version of damage control. You can select between doubloons and silver cost here. A lot of people seem to always get surprised whenever I mention this, but I recommend using the better repair. Well, honestly, I recommend it on all types of ships, but this is especially important on battleships because there's a huge difference between a 120-second cooldown and an 80-second cooldown on the repair. And I also recommend a premium repair, but this might be, I don't know, some people find it too expensive, but whatever. At least use the premium damage control. Upgrade wise, this one is fairly straightforward. Buff your main guns. The others are fairly useless. I prefer the main gun buff above all else. And artillery plotting room for additional range because the others are fairly useless. Secondary, you don't really need. AA guns, your AA is fairly weak as it is. I mean, why buff a weakness when you can instead buff what is already considered a strength? Because even if you use this, you're still not gonna make your AA good. So, interesting that you... oh yeah, of course you lose AA because you're replacing this one. And damage control, because you rarely lose engine or steering. You only lose steering if you get hit in the aft by something like a torpedo. And finally, damage control. Some people might prefer steering gears, but as you saw from the game earlier, I really have no issues dodging torpedoes without even having this module. So personally I prefer damage control, which is a flat out reduction in fire and flooding damage. Captain perks wise, well, first of all, this is the captain I'm using in ranked on my Colorado right now, so ignore a lot of it. It's still a work in progress. Basically, this is a shit perk, but I'm only using it because I want to spend my points on something, and this isn't really that valuable. When I get 18 points, as you can see, I get a 17 point captain. When I get 18 points, I will spec out of fire prevention and basic firing and get manual AA. So that way I have both AFT, manual AA. And I think, honestly, this is my Montana captain, which I'm currently using on my Colorado, but I feel like it will also work fantastically well on the Arizona. So priorities are of course situation awareness and ship survivability, aka basics of survivability. Expert marksman, because the others are fairly useless for you. I prefer vigilance before I get superintendent, because I like seeing the drops coming before I get my additional repair. Because with this you get just enough warning to be able to dodge pretty much all the torps heading your way. Fourth perk, let's see, is AFT the best one here? 64, 30, 33. Actually no, manual AA is most likely the best perk here. So getting manual AA before AFT is probably advisable on the Arizona. But honestly it doesn't matter that much, and AFT has the benefit of buffing your secondaries, and you actually have really good secondaries. Why I think these are really good is because all your secondaries fire HE, and HE secondaries are the best because they wreck DDs, they set fires to cruisers and battleships. So honestly all HE secondaries is absolutely fantastic, so with AFT you happen to buff this as well. So if you happen to go for the same captain I do, that you get AFT before manual AA, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. In fact, it might ultimately even be better. But for raw AA damage output, you should go manual AA first. But personally I will go AFT, and then when I get the points I spec out of these two and get manual fire control as well. Anyway, wait, what more? Well, the camo, I can show the camo. It's pretty default premium camo, that's pretty much on every ship. Depending on the tier, the XP bonus might change, but other than that, it's fairly straightforward. Signal wise, the only ones I really bother using on battleships is usually India Delta for more HP gained and fire prevention, since you tend to get HE spammed a lot. Other than that, maybe can slap one of these on since I'm grinding Captain XP anyway. Anyway, that was my Arizona commentary. I hope you enjoyed it.